David Cross, thank you so much for taking time with us today.
Absolutely.
Big fan. I'm a fan in part, not just of your stuff on TV shows that I watch, but you're also a comedian who talks a lot about politics, which I feel like is not always the safest or easiest thing to do, and a lot of comedians kind of avoid it. In 2002, you were criticizing George W. Bush and the war on terror way, way, way before it was acceptable to do so. And I remember this because I was working on Capitol Hill at the time, right after 9/11. And it felt like nobody could say anything, was allowed to say anything bad about George Bush or the war on terror. And in your most recent stand-up special, you rail against conservatives and their response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So you've got this tradition of actually saying out loud the things you're in some ways not allowed to say out loud. My first question for you then is, what initially drew you to political comedy and finding comedy in the politics of the day?
Well, first, let me say that I don't think it's completely accurate to say that it was just conservatives who were
sure.
anti-mask.
Sure.
There were a lot of quote unquote libertarians or whoever, wellness hippies, whatever. Just to be fair to conservatives, it wasn't just conservatives. It was kind of across the board people who were anti-mask for various different reasons. Sometimes it was freedom, and sometimes it was misinformed ideas about health. But anyway, just to clarify that. But to answer your question, and again, not to be so contrarian, but I don't consider myself a political comedian. I never have, and I balk at it a little bit because so much of my comedy isn't political. Some definitely is, but my recipe for a stand-up show that I take out on the road, and certainly what it becomes when I'm cutting it down for a live taping, is roughly third. So a third absurdist, just silly joke, dad joke shit. A third anecdotal, this crazy thing happened to me. And then a third of it is political or religious or cultural or whatever you want to call it. My guess is that stuff stands out a bit because it's pretty biting, and it is, as you said, there's a bit of like, oh my God, I can't believe he said that too soon kind of quality to it. So it's sort of, I think it feels like it's, like most of my stand-up is political, but it's just simply not true,
You do a lot of comedy on about some of the dumbest shit in our lives, like shit that's just so
American.
Stupid. Right. No, I don't mean that your comedy
There's a wealth
is
of
dumb.
material.
Right, exactly. What I mean is like you're poking fun at how stupid the stupid shit really is. I mean, I want to just on the COVID stuff, because it really resonated with me. The idea that people were rejecting the basic science. I mean, you're the one poking fun at how ridiculous it is that not listening to science is apparently freedom. Like, that's the greatest expression of freedom in America, is to just not listen to the science that's trying to protect you from dying. You're right. We live in a world where there's a wealth of those kinds of things to make fun of. I just wonder, over the course of I'm 47. I don't know how old you are. You probably roughly that age or
111.
older. Okay, you're 111 years old. Like, I'm just curious, do you think things have become stupider in the last 10, 15, 20 years? Or has it always been this ridiculous and stupid, and it's just more people are aware of it?
Well, I think it's always been this ridiculous, but more people have a platform, and you're privy just from waking up and accessing. When I was a kid, there was 3 networks and a bunch of kind of satellite independent stations, but there weren't 482 channels where you could access people spewing nonsense, and you couldn't wake up, turn on your phone, and access even more people, angry and ignorant people.
So our access to stupidity is greater.
Yeah, I think that's the difference. I think it's less of our access to stupidity and their stupidity accessing us, if that makes sense. Like,
yeah.
It's just out there, whether you want to see it or not. And people have cell phones and they can capture video of, people being just awful in a 7-Eleven or the bus or an airplane or in line at Starbucks or a gas station or anywhere. Cops, just corrupt cops we can capture on, whatever it is. It's just all kind of in our face now. I don't think those people sprouted up once technology allowed them to. I think they've always been there.
That's a really good point. Now, let's turn to the questions, some of the questions surrounding stand-up comedy. It's come under intense scrutiny in the last few years, although I feel like stand-up comedy has always been a source of controversy. Mm-hmm. The central debate of late...
If done correctly.
Exactly. The central debate right now is focused on what kind of material is appropriate or offensive to perform. Some conservatives would say it's a free speech issue, that audiences are just too sensitive these days. Some folks on the left would argue that bigoted material, racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, whatever it is, that shouldn't be performed at all. My question to you is, what do you think's at the heart of this debate? Is it actually about free speech? And how do you think about these things when you're forming your own comedy?
I think it's tribal. I think it is emotional and not logical. I think there's some comics who I understand why they're taking the position they're taking, because it's about semantics and logic and things like that. But I wish they didn't, because people get hurt. I don't think it's very tricky, and it's in a good way. And there is freedom of speech, and that is important. And I believe that if you want to go on stage and say hurtful, reprehensible things in the end of the umbrella of comedy, you have that right. But then everyone else has a right to protest it. And the thing that people seem to forget is, for better or worse, oftentimes both, we live in a capitalist society, free market capitalist society. And if a club owner, or you can extrapolate it out to, all the way to Adidas or whatever you want to say, if a company, a club owner, a brand feels like it's not, whether it's, they agree with it or not, or disagree with it or not, the things that somebody is saying, if it doesn't make a business sense for them to do that, then they won't do that. And that's end of sentence, period. That's it. So people can, try to shut people down, cancel them, as it were. So that's a very simplistic, reductive thing, this idea of cancel culture. And it's not a culture. It's just a thing. People are reacting to this stuff, whether you or I agree with it or not. They're making their voice heard, and they have access to making their voice heard in a way that didn't exist 10 years ago. And that's what they're doing. So people, I believe, have a right to say what they want to say. I wish they wouldn't. I think there are some cases where if you are directly getting people hurt or killed, then there should be consequences for that. But if you're making a joke, which I or you or we all might find very distasteful, and forgetting even the subjective idea of whether it's funny or not, but just making fun of trans people, and I wish that those comics wouldn't do that. but they have a right to, and then everybody else has a right to say, I'm going to try to get you to not perform at this space. And if they're successful, okay. And if they're not successful, okay as well.
Right. I mean, I think cancel culture is kind of a euphemism for somebody says something, uses their free speech rights to say something, and then other people use their free speech rights to criticize that person and to create a situation where that person is not platformed. I think, people being canceled for the wrong reasons can sometimes happen. It can go too far. It can feel kind of
absolutely
like a Salem witch hunt kind of thing. But I also think like cancel culture is just basically, in a lot of ways, it's just kind of, it's the internet. My view on this debate about comedians is the thing that gets me about it, somebody like Dave Chappelle, whose past material I've really liked and whose current material a lot of it I don't like, the transphobic stuff and the like, and the stuff about Jews and the like, is that it's sort of like, which targets are you choosing? Right? Like if you're up there and you're making a social critique, because in a lot of ways comedy is basically a funny social critique. You're saying out loud the things that you're pointing out truths. You're saying out loud the things that we all know to be true, but that it's target selection. In my view, the best comedy is the comedy that targets the people who have real power. And the people who have real power in America, it's pretty obvious. It's like billionaires and giant corporations have real power. I wonder if you agree with that, if you agree that a lot of this stuff is about who you're choosing or what you're choosing to ridicule, make fun of, or point or kind of point the spotlight at.
Yeah, I think that's most of it, really. And different groups, mostly care about themselves. And it's just kind of a bummer when it's just easy to do. And then the laughter at those jokes feels hurtful and cruel and doesn't sit well with me. And, to cite Dave as an example, I still think he's the king and he's amazing. And even the stuff that I am not as comfortable with, I don't think it affected me and affects me as much as it affects other people, but I still wince at it and go, and it's, the stuff on SNL about Jews, I thought it was funny, and I know Jews that didn't care for it. But I still, I can defend it intellectually. And that's part of being a comic, for better or worse, for most people.
Sure. I think my issue, one of my issues with it was, it's like, you have a platform. Why are you choosing it to focus it on that? I mean, granted, that's my own personal preference, right? I prefer comedy.
I understand that. I get that totally. And that's how I feel about the things that really deeply affect me. I guess it kind of comes down to that. Like, oh, why you got to go after them or that guy or her, or, it's like people making Monica Lewinsky jokes back in the day. Like, she was a fucking victim, man. I feel just terrible for that woman. Yeah. And she didn't ask for any of this. And it was disgusting what Clinton did to her. And that certainly wouldn't wash today. But, to make jokes about her, like that, just to use as an example. And then anybody who's trans, I just feel like it's the gay joke it's the current gay joke from the 60s and 70s, where people were getting hurt and killing themselves. And it also, unfortunately, this goes back to the people laughing at it, and that laughter feels so vicious to that person. It creates it chips away at the acceptance of that kind of hate. And I personally have a problem with that. I guarantee you, I could think of 10 really funny trans jokes. I wouldn't say them. I would not. I don't want to hurt anybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, it goes back to what you want to use your platform for, which is a good segue into my question about where
Platforms?
you get your yeah, where you get your own politics and value system. Because look, I've worked very closely with Adam McKay as an example, and Adam McKay is a guy who makes clear what his values are, and he puts his values into the the entertainment products that he creates. You obviously are somebody who puts your own politics, ideology, values into that. You're somebody who one of the reasons I appreciate your voice so much is you're not just willing to criticize conservatives, you're also willing to criticize the ridiculousness of the kind of democratic establishment. Mm-hmm. Before we get to some of that, I just want to ask, where'd you get that politics from? Like, where's that come from? Because not a lot of people our age, growing up in the the Clinton era through the Bush era through the early Obama era, like that was the era where being on the quote unquote left or having kind of lefty opinions or whatever was seen as like you're just like not allowed to. You're not really welcome in a lot of political or even entertainment spaces. So I'm just curious, where'd you get your politics?
Well, I disagree with that completely. I don't think if you were aligning yourself with Clinton or Obama that you weren't allowed in certain spaces.
Let me be clear.
Yeah.
Let me be clear. What I mean is there wasn't very much of a space to the so-called left of Clinton or in the era of partisanship, right? It's like you're either on the blue team or you're on the red team. And there's no like
so you're
space.
saying like progressives or democratic socialists.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there was always a Dennis Kucinich or, Bernie Sanders or somebody or Ralph Nader or whoever kicking around. But but to answer your question about where I got it from, I'd say mostly it's my mom. And, I moved around quite a bit when I was young, like every year. I was in a different place every year, different school, different, cultural setting every single year until I was in fourth grade. I moved down to Atlanta where I ended up, living.
Why were you moving so much?
My dad just got fired a lot and he wouldn't take responsibility for anything. And then eventually he left, which was, awful, but also maybe perhaps for the best. And so we ended up settling in Atlanta when I was 9. Well, not even Atlanta. It was a very rural suburb of Atlanta, which is now all built up. Atlanta's huge now, but back when I was growing up, it wasn't. And I was in a small town called Roswell, and I think that then it became not just kind of my mom's ideals and guidance, and she was hardly a activist lefty person. She was not at all. She was just, I think part of it was she grew up in New York, and she was Jewish, and found herself in this place with 3 kids, no money, literally just in debt. My dad really did a number, and nothing, no skills, no training, and then 3 kids and less than no money, and then had to deal with kids who were going, well, why, life's, this isn't fair, and why can't I have this, and how come I'm always hungry, and having to explain stuff, and didn't, there was never like, well, Jesus will take care of everybody in his own way. There was an absence of that. So it was really trying to explain to kids who were certainly comparatively to the other kids in the apartment complex or school. Like, I was definitely a little precocious and inquisitive and curious about why things were the way they were, and kind of wanted to know about. I read a lot and wanted to know about what was happening in DC that was affecting us, even at an early age, and things just seemed so, they didn't make any sense. And my mom would try to explain it to me like I was an adult, not like I was a kid. And I think a lot of that came from her. I think most of it, really. And then eventually you're given those tools so that when you're 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old and you're still in the same situation, you kind of grow into these understandings of why things are the way they are, and what some people on the right would call indoctrination.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the Democratic Party, because, again, as I said, you're one of
what a boring source of frustration.
Totally. And you're one of the, in my mind, you're one of the few comics at the level that you're at who sort of has that critique. We here at The Lever are regularly critical of the Biden administration, and we're critical of the right. We do that kind of reporting, and of course we regularly scrutinize the Democratic Party, mostly for being ineffectual legislators while simultaneously acting like they're the last bastion against rising fascism in the United States. Which,
you hit the nail on the head. They puff themselves up as well. They just were given such a gift with how far the pendulum swung that they can make a feeble argument like we're the last, as you said, the last bastion of the last hope for democracy in America, which is such a crock of shit. And if we were truly democratic, we'd have several parties that were viable, and they could all, work together in whatever Congress would look like then. And
right. I mean, what I say is about if you're worried about democracy, if you're worried about the democracy crisis, wait till you find out about how every single election in America is basically bought by big money, right? Like, what are we really talking about when we talk about the so-called...
and we also still have the electoral college, which is anti-democratic, and there's no way Wyoming should have as much of a say as New York, and all the way down the line. It's ridiculous.
So my question for you as a comedian is, do you find it harder to make fun of Democrats than Republicans? Because obviously Republicans are like a kind of overt clown show in a lot of ways, Republican politicians. Do you find it harder to make fun of Democrats? Do you find that the comedy is harder to land when it's about Democrats by virtue of the fact that the Republicans sort of are kind of optically so much more ridiculous?
I mean, in a sense, you wouldn't want to hear an hour of that, but and it's easier in the sense that the people on the right, the far right, are so crazy and for lack of a better word, stupid. It's almost like there's just a wealth of material there, and with the Democrats, it's kind of the same thing. It's the same idea of they're hypocrites, they're feckless, and you can make some jokes, but it's just doesn't have the buffet of options.
The Republicans are a smorgasbord.
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing, and you could definitely do some, and you should do some, or one should do some, but it's just you wouldn't want to hear. I mean, if you do want an hour of that, watch Gutfeld or whatever the fuck it is. That's there's not an hour's worth of material. You can make your points, but you can't do an hour of that and make it feel like there's been a bunch of variety.
Yeah, I think part of the reason the right has had trouble with comedy is because the sort of right-wing critique of the Democrats is actually both not that funny and not really, in a lot of ways, not really accurate. I'm talking about this kind of far right critique of the Democrats. That is actually what's more funny is a kind of left of center critique of the Democrats is more kind of darkly comedic. And actually, that raises a question that I've been wanting to ask you about comedians. A lot of white male comedians seem to be. I get the sense that there's like a lot of movement to kind of the right, and it's kind of this sort of kind of rooted in not liking liberals or not liking the cartoon of what a liberal is. But it kind of butts up against the idea, and maybe the idea is wrong, the idea that a lot of entertainers are inherently liberal. Do you think there's been a kind of shift or a drift of people in, white male comedians to a more conservative viewpoint? Is that kind of over interpreted? And if it isn't, if it is actually happening, what do you think it's about?
I don't know. I think there might be something to that. I think it's a reaction to what we were talking about earlier, where this self-defense, self-preservation in a talking about the viability of what you do for a living sense of like, hey, this has gone too far. You can't tell me what and what not to say. And it's an understandable reaction. I don't necessarily have that, but if a bunch of people that you don't know that are, that talk and dress like and sound like and appear like as you mentioned, the cartoon version of the leftist or whatever, then it's a reaction to that. And I get it. I not that would make somebody become, bigoted, but I think it's mostly a reaction to, hey, they're trying to shut me down. They're trying to shut you down. And people who might not necessarily, slide over into that world, might. And don't forget about the very, very strong, attractive pull of a bunch of strangers accepting you and a bunch of people going, hey, man, we're with you. We think you're funny. People you've never met, you never will meet, but they're clicking the like button and the heart button and the thumbs up button. And, some people have, they need that. That's to them is valid validation, and it's important to them. And that, will feed people and buoy them and make them feel like, yeah, I'm definitely doing the right thing, and I'm right. I knew I was right, and then the algorithm gets a hold, and then you become, you go further either to the left or the right, or until everybody meets in the middle again.
I mean, this is the way you just articulated, I think, gets to something so important, which is that there's kind of a reward system, especially on the right, and whether it's the algorithm or think tanks, pundit spots, it's sort of a vast reward system for moving to the right. And I think that
that reward is financial too. I mean, there's no shortage of grifting on either side, but it feels like there's way more on the right to me. And there's way more resources. There's way more of a reward system. And I think, your point about people who are left of center or in the quote unquote center, whatever that term means, who get criticized by liberals, let's say, and then react by moving to the right. I often think about it like you have to keep a check on your values, on if you have values, what your ideology, what your viewpoint is, in order to not let the criticism push you to the right just for the sake of punching back at your critics, right? Like, I think that dynamic. I'm being criticized. Yeah, but
but some people are like, well, there's a reward system over there on the right. like I'm going to be rewarded for that. And so kind of like screw these liberals who are criticizing me, even if they're like, even if they may have valid criticism, I've got a reward system over here. I feel like that's a lot of the dynamic.
Well, but it's more insidious than that. It is exactly what you said, but it's not as you're not as conscious of it. I think just to defend some of these people, I think it doesn't happen, overnight. It's a gradual thing that people, it's human nature. And whether you're stronger than that, or you're susceptible to it is depends on the individual. But I mean, I can see how it works. I mean, it works. It works for, if you get validated by all these people and you're feeling love, and, the inverse is true. It can create a really terrible, awful situation and drive somebody to, perhaps violence, to hit them with the other people saying, we hate you, you suck, you're worthless, you're a piece of shit. I remember when you used to be funny, asshole. That also has an effect, and they're both. So if you're getting that on one side, and then the other side is going, hey man, we love you, we get you. Yeah, it depends on how strong you are, but a lot of people I don't think can withstand that, and then are happy to do that, and then make a very comfortable living speaking to those folks and being part of them. So, yeah, it's unfortunate.
One last question. I think it's fair to say that some of your material is rooted in frustration, anger, that's directed at our current political system, probably why I'm drawn to it, because I feel the same way. But at the same time, you've actively engaged in constructive political projects. For instance, earlier this year, you performed in a fundraising event for Abortion Access Front. Mm-hmm. Last year, you made a great informative video for the Gravel Institute. Mm-hmm. I guess, would you consider yourself a cynic, but you're not cynical enough to kind of just be a critic and not be engaged? And if you're not a cynic, I'd be curious to know what's giving you hope these days.
Well, yes, I wouldn't say I'm a cynic, but I am definitely cynical about certain things. But that doesn't mean I have, unless I'm misunderstanding and I'm saying this truly, I might not have a full understanding of cynicism, but there are still things that offer, optimism and hope. And mostly, I would say it's my young daughter and her friends that whether I want to be or not, whether I could just take the easy way in being cynical about everything. I can't afford that for her sake and for her friends' sakes. So I find the hope and the fight there, so that she can live in a world where, it's not as awful as, and in part we've done that by living in New York. It's a very hopeful, optimistic place where I live, and, I'm not susceptible, as most people here aren't, to that nonsense about how dangerous and awful, and it's just not. That's just not the case. I mean, the facts don't back that up, and so it's kind of easy for me to say because we can live comfortably in a very progressive city, and she goes to a very diverse school down the street, and she's in the minority, and so she gets to see all kinds of people from all over the world, all kinds of economic status, and that's I think simplistically that's the greatest thing that you can have to change society for the better, is access to people other than yourselves and your mommy and daddy and aunts and uncles and the people in your cul-de-sac. There's no better prescription for trying to counteract some of the hate and the bigotry and all that stuff. So that gives me hope. And when I go, are you in New York?
I'm in Denver.
You're in Denver. Oh,
Yeah.
Boy, I was just there. You got some stuff to fix there downtown.
We do.
But there's like this thing that's the Brooklyn Children's Museum, which is one of the most beautiful places I've been to. That gives me hope when I bring my daughter there. You know?
David Cross, his most recent comedy special is I'm from the Future. You can find it at officialdavidcross.com. David, thank you so much for taking time today.
Absolutely. Thank you.